The rain was coming down in cold, relentless sheets. Inside the nearly empty bus, the driver watched a young woman at the stop, frantically searching through her pockets and her worn-out bag. Her shoulders slumped in a defeat he'd seen too many times. Just as he was about to close the doors and pull away, she looked up, her eyes meeting his through the glass, filled with a quiet panic. She stepped onto the bus, took a deep breath, and uttered the words he expected. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't have the fare." This was Laura's third day looking for work. The small diner where she'd washed dishes had closed suddenly, leaving her with a final meager check that had already gone to the rent. What little was left was for groceries for her and her 6-year-old son Leo. The bus fare, that small metallic token of passage, might as well have been a mountain. She'd counted her coins twice on the walk to the stop, hoping somehow she'd made a mistake, that a few more pennies would have appeared. But they hadn't. She had a job interview across town, a chance at a receptionist position. It was her only lead. Missing it wasn't an option. So she got on the bus, hoping for a miracle, or at least, a little understanding. The driver, named Henry, had been on this route for 15 years. He'd seen it all, the hurried commuters, the chatty students, the weary late-shift workers. He'd also seen the struggle. The people who counted out exact change in pennies, the ones who asked if they could pay next time. The rules were clear: no fare, no ride. It was posted right behind his seat. Company policy. But the policy didn't see the look in Laura's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held out her empty palm as proof. "I'm really sorry," Laura repeated, her voice barely audible over the idle rumble of the engine. "I have a job interview. If I miss it, her sentence trailed off, the consequences too heavy to speak into the quiet bus. An elderly woman in the front seat glanced over, her expression a mix of pity and mild annoyance at the delay. Henry felt the familiar tension. The schedule was tight. The dispatcher's voice in his ear. The eyes of the few passengers, waiting. The rulebook in his mind. He opened his mouth, ready to deliver the standard, firm line. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You'll have to disembark." But the words stuck in his throat. He noticed the careful neatness of her old coat, buttoned to the top against the damp. He saw the faint smudge of what looked like crayon on her sleeve, a tiny, colorful testament to a child at home. This wasn't someone trying to cheat the system. This was someone clinging to its edge. "Please," Laura murmured, a single tear escaping despite her best effort. "My son. He needs me to get this." The elderly woman sighed loudly, shifting in her seat. "Some of us have places to be, driver," she said, not unkindly, but with the impatience of a world that moves on schedule. Henry looked from the passenger to Laura, standing in the draft of the open door, the rain misting her face. It was just a bus fare. $2.50. Yet in that moment, it was a chasm between desperation and hope. He felt a strange tightening in his chest, a memory surfacing from long ago, a time when he was the one counting pennies, when a single bus ride meant the difference between making it and falling apart. He looked down at his own hands on the steering wheel, then back at Laura's pleading face. The rulebook, the schedule, the sighing passenger, it all faded into a distant hum. Something warmer, something deeper, took over. It was more than pity. It was a recognition. He leaned forward just slightly, and in a voice so low only she could hear it, a voice meant to shield her dignity from the rest of the world, he whispered, "Sit." Laura blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly over the sound of the rain and her own pounding heart. Henry gave a barely perceptible nod toward the empty seats. "Go on," he whispered again, his eyes holding a kindness that belied his gruff exterior. "Take a seat." The relief that washed over Laura was so profound her knees felt weak. She managed a trembling, "Thank you," so heartfelt it was almost a prayer, and hurried to a seat midway down the bus, her face turned toward the window to hide her flowing tears. Henry closed the doors and pulled the bus back into traffic. He didn't look back at her. But as he drove, his usual focus on the road was interrupted by a quiet realization. That whisper, "Sit," had cost him nothing. But for her, it might have meant everything. He thought of the crayon on her sleeve. He thought of his own mother, decades past, who had once stood where Laura stood. The rulebook had no column for that. No policy for compassion. A few stops later, the elderly woman who had sighed earlier approached his seat to get off. As she passed, she paused. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said softly, "You're a good man, driver." Then she stepped out into the damp afternoon. The bus continued its route, the wipers keeping rhythm with Henry's newfound quiet. When Laura's stop, the one near the large office building, approached, she stood and walked to the front. She paused by his seat, not knowing what else to say. "Thank you," she whispered once more, her voice firm now, filled with a restored hope. Henry simply nodded, offering a small warm smile. "Good luck," he said. And he meant it. He watched her step off the bus and walk briskly toward the building, her head held a little higher. He never expected to see her again. But the universe, it seems, has a way of completing its circles. 2 weeks later, on the same rainy route, a woman in a new coat boarded the bus at the same stop. She smiled brightly, swiped her pass, and instead of taking a seat, she walked right up to Henry. It was Laura. "I got the job," she said, her eyes shining. "Because of you." Henry, genuinely surprised, shook his head. "No, because of you. You did the interview." But Laura held out a small, simple brown paper bag. "I brought you lunch," she said. "Just, thank you." Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a cookie. And tucked beside it, a child's drawing. It was of a big, smiling bus with a stick figure driver at the wheel, and a yellow sun in the corner. At the top, in careful, wobbly letters, it read, "Thank you for helping my mommy." Henry took the bag, his throat unexpectedly tight. He looked at the drawing, at the bright yellow sun. That day when he'd whispered sit, he hadn't just given a bus ride. He'd given hope. And that hope had come back to him, in the form of a sandwich, an apple, and a child's drawing that now hung proudly above his dashboard. He finished his route that day with a lightness in his heart. The rain had stopped, and a pale, beautiful sunlight broke through the clouds, glistening on the wet streets. It reminded him that even the smallest act of grace can pierce through the grayest of days. Sometimes, the greatest strength isn't in holding fast to the rules, but in having the courage to whisper sit, and in doing so, offering someone a seat on the journey toward a brighter day. Share this story if it reminded you that kindness is a language every heart understands.